house give more returns. Get more security and more interest on your fixed deposits from Sri Lanka's largest finance company, LOLC Finance.
Hi, I am Shamini Pereira, Chief Curator of the Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art Sri Lanka, and today I'm going to be answering living's burning questions.
Hi Shamini, welcome to the show. It's lovely having you with us today. To start off, could you tell us about the recent initiative taken by the Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art in Sri Lanka?
The Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art Sri Lanka is a new initiative, and we launched it in 2019. And the plan is to try and establish a permanent facility that would be a museum looking at modern and contemporary art of Sri Lanka. We have so many museums in the country, but none of them look at this particular period. And when I talk about the modern and the contemporary, what I'm talking about is essentially the work produced by artists, architects and designers post-independence. But we look to work that was being done in the lead up to that independence moment. And so our scope as a museum of modern contemporary art actually starts way back around the 1890s. So this is a huge endeavor, but a very essential one. In Sri Lanka, we do not have any public or private museum of this nature, and it's something that's important to establish for a number of reasons. Firstly, from an educational point of view, museums today are spaces where we come to learn. They're spaces where art, histories from wherever we might be situated, talk to us about our history, but also about the identities that form our society, the kinds of events that have shaped and formed who we are today as various communities living in a specific place. Our cultural heritage is as much living today as it was in the past. And the Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art is therefore a place where people can come to look at artworks in architecture and design that spans this particular very long period of time. The museum is also key or important for us in the country because when people come to visit, whether that's tourists, whether that's Sri Lankans returning, there isn't such a cultural institution situated in the capital where they can come and look at artworks from this period. And not just look at it, but be very engaged in it, because our very education-led approach is such that when you come into our space, you can come in and look with the help of a visitor educator. We have information on hand to give you more information about whether it's a display or an exhibition, but you can also come in for one of the very many events that we also host. And that is a program of events that are run trilingually. They are free to the public and they happen week to week. So we really, an initiative that is also a year-round initiative, which is something bringing people in to look at artworks and exhibitions of curated nature. The other reason why a museum of this kind is important is because in the country, I think what we are all facing is the need for what has been in the past, perhaps certain ways of doing things, and the need that we're looking at to change, to look at institutions in particular to offer more in terms of public benefit is another reason why this museum is seeing itself as part of what we are seeing as this change that we are desperately looking for in the future.
As a curator, how do you find new artists and ideas?
Oh, this is a wonderful part of being a curator. When you're taught or when you start working as a curator, this is something that you learn as part of your job. You are constantly researching, you're thinking about artists, whether they are young artists, whether they're up and coming. And you're also looking at those artists that are the older generation, those that are no longer with us as well. And research is such an important part of what you do. And sometimes that research doesn't have an end goal. It's very open-ended, but you're accumulating information, whether it's about a single painting or just to know what came after a painting that you know about. You're looking at the life of the artist. And then you're also looking back, trying to step back and think about how what might be going on at a certain time in history might have a theme to it, or some kind of perhaps shared affinity with maybe something happening in another part of the country, or between artists who are working in very different medias. Research is actually such a key part of being a curator, and what we do have is as curators, what we do need to think about too is how our research should be very thorough, and how not just reading but talking to artists, interviewing artists, visiting lenders or collectors I should say, to find out about what has been collected, looking at also what we describe as art histories that have been forgotten, have been overlooked. And by that what I mean is, when we look at art and architecture and design in Sri Lanka, the first place we might go for research is books. But those books don't necessarily represent everything. And those books have also got many gaps in them. So these are the overlooked art histories that I'm talking about, which as a curator we need to be very thoughtful about. So there's not just, let's say, one artist or one architect or one designer that is known about or celebrated, but in and around their time of working there would have been other artists and other architects, and bringing perhaps awareness to the fact that that has been the case, and that art history is not a singular kind of narrative. There are art histories, and in Sri Lanka with the 3 languages we've written mostly in English. In Sri Lanka, because we have 3 languages, we have written mostly about our art histories in English, whereas actually there's a lot to be said for the art histories that haven't been written about in Tamil and in Sinhala as well. So that's another, let's say, element of the work that many of the curators in MMCA Sri Lanka are involved with looking into, so that those can be brought into the discussions, into the presentations, into the exhibitions, so that we have a much more calibrated understanding of art practices over a period of time.
Could you tell us more about the Encounters exhibition and how it came about?
So Encounters is an exhibition that brings together artworks that come from very different eras. And when we think of an encounter, it's quite simply just thinking about one maybe artwork and another being put into an encounter, a conversation, juxtaposition. And those juxtapositions or those encounters will bring about, we hope, unexpected ways of looking at maybe one work and the work that it is sitting in front of. And Encounters was trying to perhaps look a little bit more closely at the artists who we put under the so-called modern period, artists like George Keat, and thinking about them in relationship with our younger or our contemporary artists. The other side of Encounters was thinking about an artist like George Keat and an artist like Senaka Senanaka, and saying to ourselves, what do we really know about their individual artworks? We know them by name, but beyond that, perhaps are we able to, as a museum, but also as the general public, as collectors, talk about very specific details and contexts and histories about one work by, let's say, each of those particular artists. But there are other artists that are in this exhibition, and those are the artists that are people like Khalik Aziz, Janani Kure, Nelun Harasgama, A. Mark, who are artists that have also been making works that, if you don't necessarily know their work, this might be an occasion to come to find out about it, because Encounters is putting them into perhaps a context that they haven't been seen in before, which is alongside the big named artists, the Keats and the Senaka Senanakas. And on the Senaka Senanaka side and the Keats side, there haven't been exhibitions that have put their artworks put their artworks on display in a curated context. Keats' work and Senaka's works have largely been seen in commercial contexts. They have had exhibitions, in the case of Senaka Senanaka, in his galleries, which are commercial, but he's very rarely seen in the context of a curated exhibition. So one of the really perhaps most successful displays and Encounters is a work is a display that starts with a huge work by Senaka Senanaka from 1976. And coming to know, as we found out when we did the research about the particular context of that work, that it was commissioned for the Fifth Northern Line Summit that took place in Sri Lanka, under Mrs. Bandaranaike's government, that gave us this, I felt like a real opportunity to think about that work by Seneca, which for people who knew his work didn't really know anything about this involvement with the non-aligned summit, but also how that work was then positioned to talk about other aspects of this hugely major event that took place. We brought into the exhibition other works by Aubrey Collette. We have in that same display a whole group of not artworks but published materials that were all part of the non-aligned movement's writing collectives, who are artists from writers, poets from the Afro-Asian Writers Bureau, in fact. And we came to find out during the course of our research on this exhibition that the Afro-Asian Writers Bureau was in fact located in Sri Lanka for a period of time. So that has also come into this particular display. So here is something, when I go back to perhaps why did we do encounters, it brings to light something that we would never have come to know if we had just looked at this Seneca Senanayake painting, and that these things together build up perhaps a number of narratives that bring to light just another way of looking at Seneca's work, but also a very important kind of time of art making in the 60s and 70s.
What is the key thing to consider when you curate an exhibition like Encounters?
One of the key considerations when curating Encounters is not just the artworks, but the audience, their experience of the artworks. So the consideration here is, how do you bring artworks together to tell a story? How are they hung? What is hung in relationship to something? How are they perhaps sitting in opposition to one another? And those are considerations that come through from the conversations that take place between our curatorial team and our design team. These are exhibitions where design plays a very key role, the exhibition design that is. And those two elements, the curatorial and the exhibition design, are thinking about the audience. What is it for an audience to walk in? What does it mean for an audience to walk into a space like this? How are they going to be able to understand what we're thinking about as curators? And that's not always the case, and that should be something that is slowly given to them through various parts of the exhibition, which are the design, plus information, giving them an experience, I suppose, which is having them not feel like they come in and they don't know where to start. They don't know anything. So the information that we provide for them may be writing on the walls, which is the didactics, but also you don't need to just read. Not everyone wants to read or wishes to read. So we have the whole programs that come in, a number of other programs that come in, which are with our visitor educators who are on hand to be able to talk to people about a particular display, talk to them about specific artwork. And those are important considerations that we take on board when we are at the beginning of an exhibition, thinking about how is this going to be of interest to the general public. And another aspect of perhaps the curating that we give considerable thought to is the way in which some of the subjects that Encounters deals with, how those subjects are taught in schools. And in the display that looks at the non-aligned movement, we were keen to be able to connect it also with the history curriculum, which is taught in O-levels, on the O-level syllabus. And the national O-level syllabus includes teaching about the non-aligned movement, but it doesn't specifically give students enough content to allow them to recognize that the 5th Non-Aligned Summit took place here. So we also think of the exhibitions as classrooms, as places where students and teachers can come and look at the artworks on display, and these are resources just as much as what they might be taught in a school classroom, but here they can look at something and gain information about perhaps a particular event in a way that we think is perhaps more memorable, perhaps something that will help them understand the relationship of what they're being taught in the context of Sri Lanka.
What would you like visitors to take away from this particular exhibition?
One of the other things that we would like visitors to take away when they have visited us is to perhaps think about how important a museum like this is. and how having a museum that is permanent, that is of a larger scale, that has a place in the future that we are all looking towards, that this is something that they would see as being an important part of that future. A place where you can not only just see art, but it's a place where you can come and see something that has been curated professionally. Putting artworks on the wall just for commercial reasons is a very important part of showing art, but just as important, it is also there to see, we see museums, or need of a museum is to be able to work non-commercially, to be able to put artworks together in a context, to talk about stories, to talk about things that maybe are in our society that are not perhaps easy to talk about, but equally also things that are in our minds that we want a space to come in and look and give rise to some kind of discussion. And if people can take away something at that level, I think we are going to start to grow the audience for a museum, which we currently don't have. We need to think about how this museum in the making will only be successful because of the audience. And that audience can be people who are coming from all walks of life, of all ages, of all levels of knowledge. And this museum is a place where we have to do a great deal of work around making it a place where everybody actually feels welcome and they take something away that they think of as important in terms of information, or a place to come to gather, to meet with friends, to come and learn something, but equally something to be proud of. That it's showing to them something that maybe they weren't aware of, that Sri Lanka does have an incredibly important, an incredibly rich history of modern and contemporary art, which is something that we don't have a museum in the country at the moment to showcase.
The pandemic put a pause on many creative fields. How did COVID-19 affect the museum and your work?
The pandemic was, of course, something that affected us in numerous ways. We were, when we began, in another venue, and what it gave us then opportunity for was to sit back, think about a number of projects that we could be busy researching and preparing, so that when the opportunity came, we could reopen the museum, which is exactly what we did. And in reopening the museum, we also took an opportunity to move from our other space that we had been using. And we moved to the Crescat Boulevard, which is a shopping mall, and for many people perhaps not where they would associate to see a museum, but it's actually a very important kind of space. It's a space which is public, and where we were previously, that kind of public weren't perhaps able to access the space that we were in so easily. So the pandemic, of course, gave us this opportunity to prepare for the opening exhibition that is Encounters, that will be coming to a close in a couple of weeks' time. In the course of the pandemic as well, what we were able to do, in fact, was grow our team. When many museums around the world were doing the opposite, we, in fact, were able to continue to grow our team from being, at that time, 4 people, to today we are now 12 people. It was also a time where we could involve ourselves with much more training, which is another very important part of the work that the museum is doing. And the training involves trying to build capacity for a range of professionals that need to be able to be skilled and expert to work in a museum dealing with modern and contemporary art. So it was a time of obviously great difficulty, but we made sure that it also gave to us an opportunity here to ensure that we built up what we had just started and ensure that it wasn't going to disappear. And when the pandemic allowed us to all meet again in person, we were able to open not just with a new venue, but a new exhibition and a much larger team of people as well.
How has social media changed the operations of the museum?
Social media has been incredible. We have, with social media, been able to reach audiences that we would never have been able to before. prior to also having social media, I think most of what we would have been doing would have happened probably in a single language. And social media has allowed us here, crucially, to reach audiences in the Tamil-speaking communities and in the Sinhala-speaking communities. And what the social media, I think, audiences have also shown us too is that there is an interest from these other language-speaking groups towards the kind of work we do. And even if they are not necessarily able to come in person, we can see them following us, getting involved perhaps with the conversations that we're having through social media. Social media has also meant that we can reach audiences outside of Sri Lanka. The physical ability to visit is obviously restricted to those who are living mostly in Colombo. But our international audience who are out there have also been able to follow what we're doing, learn about this initiative, and think too about the way in which we're working to compare ourselves to perhaps museums, although we are a museum in the making, but to look at the work that we're doing in comparison to more established museums. And I think our international audience, which is very important in terms of artists, it's also to show them that this is also a place where we can show their works, where in the future we might be able to also collect their works. And I think social media has amplified perhaps that possibility for us in a way that before it wouldn't have been so easy to do, because you would have needed to visit in person, and also I think connections with what we are able to do now online, not just social media, but as we all saw during the pandemic, to bring us closer together in ways that we hadn't imagined before. And our international audience as well, I should mention, is made up of those who are near as well as far. And our South Asian community of artists and collectors and curators and other institutions are also a very key group of people that have been able to come on the journey with us, to follow us and see what we've been doing. And in fact, that has also meant that, or led to, a number of people from South Asia coming and visiting us. And that's also, I think, something to be applauded through the kind of means that we have through social media.
What can we expect to see next at the MMCA?
Our next exhibition, which will be opening on the 5th of May, is an exhibition that focuses on contemporary art only. And we're excited about this because we have been working on it for the last year and a half. It's also an exhibition that focuses on artists who are not just based in Sri Lanka. And the title of the exhibition is called The Foreigners. And it's an exhibition that looks at what does it mean to be foreign. When we think of perhaps the image of the foreigner in Sri Lanka, maybe the most obvious one comes to mind of the tourist, the person that comes from outside and comes to visit us as an established tourist destination. And what this exhibition is looking at is to explore that notion of the foreigner in the many various ways in which we can see foreigners beyond the tourist. What about the artists? What about the numerous people in Sri Lanka that have left, who have gone to other places, and they go as foreigners to places to become, hopefully, citizens, to be naturalized, to become part of a new culture, a new nation, and find new homes. And a number of the artworks in this exhibition are looking at foreigners from that perspective as well. So it's an exhibition that I think will be very interesting for most people who are in some way or another related to, have relations who are living abroad, and see those relations also visit and come back to Sri Lanka almost as tourists, and the perspectives that change with those differences. The other side of, or another aspect of the foreigners is that it will look at, in the artworks that we have on display, what does it mean to be a foreigner from a language? How can we also be foreign to community? And many of the artworks in this exhibition will be looking at those different kinds of experiences. So we're looking forward to being able to open this. It will be open for 5 months, and is an exhibition that also will help us to connect with a number of artists who are working outside of Sri Lanka, whose practices are an important part of what we consider to be the art histories that are part of the MMCA Sri Lanka's mandate in terms of what we are researching, what we would hope to collect in the future, but at this point in time to build exhibitions about and to build public awareness about more than anything.
A people resplendent with sincerity still walk amongst us. Be honest. The beauty of a nation lies in the integrity of its people. Refresh Sri Lanka for a civic-minded society. In association with AICPA and CIMA, CA, the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Sri Lanka, and 99X. LMD, the voice of business.
Hi Shamini, welcome back to the show, and we have a fun little game for you. So there are 25 questions that I'm going to ask you, but you cannot use the words yes, no, can, can't, would and would not. So you have to be a little creative with your answers. Okay, so the first question. Can you see the moon from your window?
Sometimes.
Do you think aliens can read your mind?
Of course.
Have you ever been drunk during the day?
Never.
Have you ever cut your bangs or hair on your own?
Once.
Do you believe that we evolved from animals?
Absolutely not.
Do you believe in aliens?
Only sometimes.
Have you ever lost a bet?
Many.
Have you ever been arrested?
Not that I'm aware of.
Do you fall asleep easily?
That's a big problem.
Do you know any funny insults, and can you say one of them?
I don't think I can.
Have you ever met a celebrity?
Several.
Does your birthday happen on the same day every year?
Well, it must.
Do you like to gossip with co-workers or friends?
That would be very unprofessional.
Have you ever followed an embarrassing trend?
Who doesn't?
Have you ever snuck out of the house?
That would be something you'd have to ask my mother.
Did you have an imaginary friend growing up?
Many.
Would you compliment a complete stranger?
That's always a lovely thing to do.
Have you ever forgotten someone's birthday?
Thanks to Google Calendar, never.
Was your first name always the same?
As far as I can remember,
Did you find your lost key?
I never lost it.
Have you ever held a monkey?
I don't believe I have.
Is your favorite person yourself?
Of course not.
Do you faint easily?
I've never fainted.
Do you memorize the menu at your favorite restaurant?
I don't think I do.
Okay, and the last question. Would you want to be the president of Sri Lanka?
That's a tough question to answer. I will pass. There you have it. These are my answers to the questions and the game. Be sure to check out Living's Instagram and Facebook for the latest episode of Living Gets Real. See you later. Bye.